Hi, my name is Nick Hours from Sedara, and today we're going to talk about offensive security operations and how to integrate them into your environment. Welcome to the Whiteboard series. Today we are going to talk about a crawl, walk, run approach to introducing offensive operations to your environment. First, let's talk a little bit about why that's important, what offensive security operations might sound like, what they might be. It's a fancy word, but ultimately we're talking about replicating the type of tactics and procedures that real-world hackers are using to penetrate networks. That's important because although you may not think that you'll land in the crosshairs of an attacker, there's a long list of ways that you just happen to fall into that category. Offensive security operations from a little bit more detailed perspective could probably warrant its own video. But from a high level today, we could talk about how to gauge your organization, where you are in terms of cybersecurity maturity, and what that might mean you should be doing or starting to do or already doing. So that being said, let's jump into the crawl stage. If you're a crawl stage in terms of cybersecurity maturity, odds are you are probably really just spending most of your time as, at least the IT organization, IT side of the organization is spending the majority of their time just putting out fires, ensuring that upgrades are complete, hardware is repaired, end user tickets are resolved, and perhaps once that's all done, there's really not a whole lot of extra time for them. That's where we tend to see a lot of organizations struggle, right? Because how do you go above and beyond and prepare for an advanced attack when right now all your time is just being spent making sure production is production? Well, a couple simple things you could start to do would be your asset discovery, understanding where your important business critical assets are. Are they internal? Are they external? Are they cloud hosted? You want to at least focus on the business critical ones. If you have hundreds or thousands of lower, value assets, this sounds like a big task, so start by getting just the really important ones accounted for. A vulnerability scan of those assets would be the next step. That's going to essentially give you any low-hanging fruit that an attacker might find. And when I say low-hanging fruit, I don't necessarily mean low-value fruit. Usually low-hanging fruit to an attacker would be something actually high value and really easy to attack. And a lot of these we actually see described as worms because they're so simple that an attacker scripts them, sends them out on the internet, and if you happen to be missing that, part of their script is to just kind of catch you if they find you. You don't want that, and vulnerability scanners are great at finding those types of low-hanging fruit, as well as some other issues. So as long as you're getting those scans done, you're at least starting to kind of take ownership of where you might have weakness within your business critical assets. The basic assessment would be the next one. I would say it would come into place right after the asset discovery and the vulnerability scan. You kind of have an understanding of where your weaknesses are and your business assets that are very critical. Now you kind of want to understand who's responsible for them, why they're responsible for them, what's their purpose, and have a general idea now of what a weakness might look like in your organization in a really important area. Once you achieve all these things, you can start to move into the walk phase. It's going to be your penetration test, which is essentially taking your vulnerability scan, taking well-known tactics that real-world attackers are using, and taking it a step further. So if that vulnerability report that you've been getting that says, you have some really bad vulnerability, but you're not sure if it's even exploitable, a pen test is going to tell you right away that it's exploitable or it's not, because you do get false positives in vulnerability scans occasionally. Some of the other things you're going to get out of a pen test would be a better understanding of your external assets, why they're vulnerable, if they are. Your internal assets will typically get tested, like an Active Directory network, and your printers, your internal routing and switching, all those things could contain vulnerabilities. Social engineering is a big one because no matter how advanced and sophisticated of a security control you think you have, it unfortunately only takes one end user to kind of circumvent all of those controls and let an attacker in, probably on mistake, but it happens pretty commonly. So social engineering is a big one. And then your wireless. A lot of people just think of Wi-Fi as, I can walk around, I can get internet, it's not a big deal. But if it's not properly secured, an attacker could be in your parking lot, outside your building, connected, and there's a whole plethora of issues that could come with that. So a penetration test can help really identify a lot of things that would be missed from a vulnerability scan, and will give you an even better idea of like, okay, I'm an attacker, I'm going to do these things in this order. So vulnerability scanning in the crawl stage could have been simple. You're just kind of covering your basic assets and a basic scan, right? So improved vulnerability scanning is going to be ensuring that the majority, if not all of your assets are being scanned, because it only really takes one vulnerable asset to cause a big issue. You want to not just be scanning, but you want to actually be actively looking at these reports. You want to be doing something about the reports, not just looking at them, putting them away. You want to be looking for at least like a high and a critical severity vulnerability and trying to resolve it, patch it, mitigate it if it can't be patched. That's kind of the level of vulnerability scanning. Probably a little bit better of a vulnerability scanner, as where maybe you're just using a free or trial or open source one here. They're going to be vastly improved, consistent, like some sort of schedule or routine. That's the level of a vulnerability scanning you would have here. So let's say you've had a pen test, you feel like you know all your assets, you think you're doing pretty good. You're probably ready for or already in the run category. That's a level of maturity you'll see most of your Fortune 50s, probably Fortune 100 companies at. A place of business that has had a pen test every year, has been doing their vulnerability scans regularly. Probably the reports have gotten smaller and smaller for months or years now. So now what? How do we continue to improve the maturity of our organization from a cybersecurity standpoint? Well, that's where you are in run, and a red team engagement would be the biggest thing that you could probably do at this stage. That is because you are not just replicating what an attacker does in a one place and time situation like you would have in a pen test. A red team engagement is going to be closer to 3 to 6 months, maybe longer, as where your pen test is 3 to 6 weeks. Red team engagement is going to not just gauge technical vulnerabilities and maybe some social engineering, it's going to gauge business logic flaw. Can we not just credential harvest? Can we convince your accounting department to send money to create a new employee for us? All sorts of things that go a little bit beyond your standard scanning assets, probing assets, figuring out if they're vulnerable. The other thing that you can do besides this red team engagement is active remediation. You can't really have that active remediation without the red team engagement, because the results from this red team engagement are going to be things like your MITRE, ATT, and CK matrices. It's going to be reporting on that. So how were we initially able to get in? How were we able to stay in? Things like that. And then you're going to get time to detection reporting, time to mitigation reporting, again, the business logic flaw. And so all these kind of condense into a red team report. And that red team report is going to drive advanced remediation. Things like, oh, not just we didn't patch the server, but we have a patching issue. There's no policy that makes us consistently patch. We're kind of just doing it willy-nilly. Things like that, as an easy example, would be identifiable in an advanced remediation session. Past that, we actually, and it's not up here, but we have a bonus of a sprint speed maturity. Let's say you've had the red team engagement, the advanced remediation, you've been through everything you see on the board here, maybe even a few extra things in terms of offensive security. Some extra things you could start thinking about are bug bounty program, which would be essentially an agreement between your organization and a vendor. That vendor helps mitigate a crowdsourced security testing of whatever you determine to be in scope. Typically, there's some sort of subscription fee with that. Then you pay out only if the attackers find vulnerabilities, and the payout is based on how severe the vulnerability is. You're ultimately opening yourself up to a lot of attackers, but you believe that you're past pretty much the full maturity of a cybersecurity, offensive security scale. So with that in mind, you're probably going to be pretty well locked down. You're going to get some answers here and there that maybe you weren't expecting from the open source community, but at the end of the day, that's probably the next thing you would want to do. After that, perhaps you enjoyed the red team engagement, you found a lot of value in that. The advanced remediation drove some company-wide changes. There starts to get into a red team as a service type of agreement or interaction with any vendor that would offer that sort of thing. And that is going to be your red team style engagement, but over 6 months to a year to 2 years, or even 3 years. The reason that's very important, especially if you're a very large organization, is because historically some of the biggest breaches were based on an attacker who had spent weeks, months, years just kind of figuring out an organization before they made their move. That ultimately caused a really large breach. So something to consider is basically an ongoing engagement with an offensive security professional or group of professionals. You really want to ultimately consider offensive security for your organization, because just like you would have a fire suppression system in a business, and you have fire drills and E911 tested to make sure the fire truck comes, if there's a fire, everybody knows how to get out because there's a policy that teaches them how to get out of the building. They've gone through it, everything works, they know. You want to do the same thing for your network security, right? You have your firewall, you have your antivirus, you have maybe some level of end user awareness training, and now, how do you know it works? Well, there's 2 ways. You either test it using some of these methods, or you wait until, unfortunately, maybe something like a breach happens, and that's a good way to find out that they didn't work. So, in conclusion, here's a great way to figure out where you might stand now and how you can move forward. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.